Have you noticed how Hollywood movies have been portraying women and men lately? Have you seen the shift in perspective compared to how they were represented in past decades? Did you know that this new shift has led to economic losses for many companies in the film industry? In this video, we'll explore the truth behind the recent feminist shift in some of Hollywood's cinematic productions. Before we get started, don't forget to give this video a like, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications to stay updated with our latest content. We will begin by analyzing the reasons that have led to the assignment of specific tasks between men and women throughout history, and how this division has consolidated certain roles traditionally associated with each gender. Then, we will explore how these roles have evolved and changed in the present, adapting to new social and cultural dynamics. We will use the words genre and gender instead of the word starting with S, to avoid any claims from the platform where it's being published. The gender division of labor. In the animal kingdom, species are classified according to the degree of development and the ability of the offspring to survive on their own at birth. This gives rise to two main categories: precocial and altricial species. Within the altricial group, there is an even more dependent subcategory, the superaltricial, precocial animals. Precocial animals are born with advanced development, able to see, hear, move, and feed themselves shortly after birth. Common examples include ducks and gazelles, whose offspring require less immediate care from their parents. Altricial animals. In contrast, altricial animals are born in an immature state, blind and unable to move or feed themselves. These offspring, like kittens or chicks, are completely dependent on parental care for survival. Superaltricial animals. Superaltricial animals, like humans, represent the extreme of this dependency. We are born with extremely limited neurological and physical development, requiring intensive care for years. Human babies, for example, are born blind, deaf, and with a very limited motor system, meaning they are entirely dependent on their caregivers for food and protection. A human baby cannot feed itself for months or even years. The gender division of labor in humans. Humans have lived on Earth for at least 300,000 years. The story of humanity's origins dates back to the Paleolithic, a period that encompassed the majority of our evolution as a species. During this time, survival was extremely challenging. Most newborns did not reach reproductive age due to famines, diseases, attacks from wild animals, or conflicts with other human groups, all of which competed for scarce resources. Humans were nomadic, migrating with the seasons in search of food, following the animals we hunted, and avoiding cold, hunger, and harsh climates. Many of our current tendencies and predispositions are the result of adaptations necessary for surviving in this relentless environment. Throughout evolutionary history, our ancestors found that one of the best survival strategies was the gender division of labor. This strategy involved a differentiation in the roles and responsibilities of men and women to optimize the survival of the species. The gender division of labor assigned specific tasks to men and women. Historically, women assumed roles related to reproduction, child-rearing, and home care, while men were responsible for activities like hunting, physical labor, and resource provision. During pregnancy, a woman's protection became crucial as she carries the offspring for 9 months. Since women are the only ones who can breastfeed, they had to remain close to the offspring to feed and protect them. Meanwhile, men took on the responsibility of finding food, participating in tasks like hunting, and protecting the family from wild animals or human aggressors, tasks that required more mobility and physical strength. Over generations, the gender division of labor led to the development of different skills for men and women. Men, traditionally in charge of hunting and protection, developed abilities like physical endurance, weapon handling, and spatial orientation. These skills were essential in early hunter-gatherer societies. Women, on the other hand, responsible for gathering and child-rearing, developed abilities such as attention to detail, spatial memory, and multitasking, which allowed them to care for their offspring while gathering food. Complementarity of roles. The evolution of specialized roles has allowed human societies to maximize efficiency in resource gathering and offspring care, adapting to environmental and social challenges. These differentiated tasks also shaped distinct emotional and behavioral characteristics between men and women. Women who did not feel enough attachment or love for their offspring, to the point of not feeding them properly, did not see their children survive to adulthood or reproduce. Thus, we descend from generations of women who demonstrated a strong instinct for care and protection, at least enough to ensure their children's survival. Similarly, men who lacked the determination to hunt and provide for their families, or to defend them against wild animals or other human aggressors, faced the risk that their offspring would not survive. If a woman failed to find a man capable of providing and protecting, it was likely her offspring would not reach adulthood. Thus, we descend from the most determined and capable men to provide food and defend the family. It's important to note that the tasks of both genres were complementary, and both were necessary for the offspring's survival. Women who showed a strong instinct for care passed on their traits, while men who excelled in hunting and protection ensured their family's survival. Both roles were essential for the species' preservation and success. The Neolithic, the impact of agriculture on the division of labor. Approximately 10,000 years ago, with the advent of agriculture, human societies became sedentary, marking the beginning of the Neolithic period. During this era, people established permanent settlements, often located near major rivers such as the Tigris, Euphrates, Nile, and Indus. These river valleys provided fertile soil and reliable water sources, enabling the cultivation of crops like wheat, barley, and legumes. Along with farming, humans began to domesticate animals, such as sheep, goats, and cattle, which provided a stable food supply. This shift from a nomadic lifestyle to agriculture and animal husbandry laid the foundation for the development of complex societies, leading to the rise of civilizations. The division of labor intensified, with men engaging in intensive agriculture and women focusing on domestic and light agricultural tasks, like harvesting. This specialization continued to adapt, and in many cultures, men assumed political, military, and economic roles, while women remained in the domestic sphere. But this was accompanied by a sense of male superiority. Men felt not only physically stronger than women, but also felt more capable and fit than women to perform the tasks that social norms typically attributed to men. Women were seen as eternally dependent, incapable of making decisions on their own. It was the men in their lives, fathers, brothers, or husbands, who took responsibility for making decisions on their behalf. This sense of male superiority was passed down alongside social norms from generation to generation. Institutionalization of norms. Over time, customs that arose as survival strategies became institutionalized, turning into cultural and religious norms. Most societies came to interpret these norms as sacred, believing that disobedience would bring divine punishment. The Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, and the changes in the conditions that justified the gender division of labor. Gradually over centuries, but abruptly with the arrival of Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution, the social structure changed drastically. Beginning with the Enlightenment, it became evident that when women were granted the same education as men and under the same conditions, they demonstrated the ability to become professionals, philosophers, scientists, and even military personnel. In this way, they could engage in the same intellectual and professional activities as men, proving that access to knowledge was not determined by gender, but by the opportunities provided. Previously, the gender division of labor was based on biological needs and survival. Men hunted and performed physical labor while women cared for children and managed the household. However, industrialization shifted work to factories, where both men and women could perform similar roles under very different conditions from the past. This reduced the need for a strict differentiation of roles based on biology. Technological advances and industrial growth made men's physical skills less critical for the species' survival. Machines, rather than physical strength, determined work efficiency, allowing women to enter the workforce and perform the same tasks previously limited to men. Women proved they could provide for themselves without needing a man. Additionally, civilized life made attacks by wild animals or other human aggressors on the family increasingly rare. The man's protector role also became less relevant. This gradually eroded the justification for traditional gender roles, as women demonstrated their ability to participate in productive activities outside the home, challenging the norms that limited them to the domestic sphere. As women gained new spaces in society, previously exclusive to men, and accessed new educational opportunities, the social norms that had governed the gender division of labor began to be seen as oppressive. The ideal that women should only focus on child-rearing and home care was questioned, as many realized they could contribute significantly to society beyond these roles. If it was once believed that women were incapable of performing tasks and functions that social norms had considered exclusively masculine, everyday facts began to prove otherwise. There was a mismatch, a gap between inherited norms and the current material conditions of existence and survival. The old norms, once seen as necessary for survival, were increasingly perceived as obstacles to autonomy and individual progress, especially for women, who led movements for gender equality. However, the demonstration of women's equal ability to perform the same tasks as men, under new material conditions, also dealt a blow to the deeply rooted sense of male superiority. The rise of feminism. What is feminism? Feminism emerged as a social, political, and philosophical movement, seeking equal rights and opportunities for women and men. Different branches of feminism. Over time, various feminist currents have emerged. Some of the main ones are liberal feminism, advocates for legal and political equality between men and women. It focuses on legal reforms like voting rights, equal work opportunities, and education. Radical feminism argues that the root of women's oppression lies in patriarchy, a social structure that privileges men. It calls for a profound transformation of society and criticizes traditional institutions that perpetuate gender inequality. Socialist or Marxist feminism analyzes women's oppression from an economic perspective, linking patriarchy with capitalism. It argues that women's liberation can only be achieved by eliminating class inequalities. Intersectional feminism focuses on how different forms of oppression, gender, race, class, gender orientation, interact. It recognizes that not all women experience oppression in the same way and advocates for an inclusive struggle that considers differences among women. Cultural feminism values the differences between men and women and argues that women should play a central role in society based on their distinctive characteristics, such as their ability to nurture and care. Ecofeminism links the oppression of women with the exploitation of nature. It advocates for a more equitable and sustainable society, where both women and the environment are respected. Postmodern feminism questions fixed categories of identity, such as man or woman, and seeks to dismantle gender binaries. It argues that gender is a social construct. It should be noted, however, that like most social movements, many feminist activists may adhere, knowingly or not, to positions belonging to one or more feminist currents, sometimes even holding contradictory views. Radical feminism and feminist supremacism. Feminism, like every cultural revolution, challenges deeply entrenched social norms, and in this process, just like other revolutions, more extreme and radicalized groups emerge. Just as the French Revolution had the Jacobins and Robespierre, in feminism, there are also activists who take their ideas to an extreme, sometimes distorting the original principles of equality that the movement promotes. Within feminist currents, especially in radical and postmodern feminism, but not exclusively, some have come to reverse the traditional values that once favored men. If in the past, men were seen as superior in terms of intellectual, physic, or moral capacity, now according to these extreme views, it is women who occupy that position of superiority. From this perspective, men are relegated to a position of inferiority. Thus, these currents do not seek equality of rights and opportunities between men and women, as historical feminisms did, but rather a new hierarchy where women, due to their supposed intellectual, moral, and aesthetic superiority, should occupy positions of power in society. In this framework, proving the inferiority of men becomes essential to validate these demands and justify their aspirations for privilege. Feminism in Hollywood, Ellen Ripley and Sarah Connor. Hollywood cinema has shifted from representing feminist positions focused on equality of rights and opportunities for men and women to a more extreme trend that sometimes turns supremacist. While earlier feminist representation sought gender equity, promoting strong female characters without undermining male ones, more recent productions display a focus where women are inherently presented as superior. This, instead of fostering true equality, reinforces stereotypes that invert the power dynamics, distorting the initial goal of feminism, which is equity and inclusion. For example, the female empowerment in characters like Ellen Ripley and Sarah Connor not only stands out for their bravery and resilience, but also for their focus on personal sacrifice and commitment to others. Both Ripley and Connor become protectors of those who depend on them. In the case of Ellen Ripley, her fight in the Alien saga goes beyond her own survival. She risks her life to save her companions, and later becomes a maternal figure protecting young Newt in Aliens. Similarly, Sarah Connor, in Terminator 2, sacrifices herself for her son John, who is the future leader of the human resistance. Her strength is tied to the fact that her actions are driven by a greater purpose, the protection of humanity. Both characters are not necessarily strong from the start. Their evolution is a gradual process. Ripley, in the first Alien, begins as a flight officer caught in a dire situation, and as she faces deadly challenges, her strength manifests. Sarah Connor, on the other hand, starts as an ordinary young woman in The Terminator, but after being pursued by a killer cyborg, she transforms into a determined and highly capable warrior, willing to do whatever it takes to save her son and humanity. Their relationships with male counterparts are respectful and cooperative. Ripley works as a team with men like Hicks in Aliens, and there is never any gender rivalry. Instead, her leadership shines without diminishing the male characters. Sarah Connor also interacts with male characters like Kyle Reese and the Terminator himself in a collaborative way, where both genders contribute to mutual survival. This reinforces that their empowerment is not based on opposition to men, but on their intrinsic capacity to face common threats equitably. Both characters, Ellen Ripley and Sarah Connor, have earned the respect, affection, and admiration of the audience. And they have also represented women capable of taking on roles traditionally attributed to male characters in films. On the other hand, we have the new Hollywood movies that, in recent years, have changed the representation of both men and heroines. In movies like Star Wars, The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, The Rise of Skywalker, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, and Captain Marvel, female heroines often take center stage in the narrative, but their portrayals lack balance, depth, and character development. In these movies, the heroines tend to play a more dominant role than their male counterparts. Rey in Star Wars and Carol Danvers in Captain Marvel stand out for their absolute protagonism, sometimes highlighting the intrinsic inferiority of the male characters. For example, Rey is powerful from the start without much training, contrasting with classic heroes like Luke Skywalker, who must go through a long journey of growth. In Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, Phoebe Waller-Bridge's character is also portrayed as more clever and resourceful than Indiana Jones, reinforcing a dynamic of superiority. Rey and Captain Marvel are less deep and complex than heroes like Ripley or Sarah Connor because they don't face significant emotional or personal challenges that require real development. They are perceived as perfect from the beginning, which limits their evolution and makes them less realistic or relatable to the audience. This can create a perception that their strength is unearned and simply granted to them. While characters like Sarah Connor fight to protect their child and humanity, some of these new heroines seem more focused on demonstrating their power and self-sufficiency. Carol Danvers, for example, in Captain Marvel, has a narrative centered on discovering and affirming her own power, with her motivation being individual, not altruistic. In summary, although these modern heroines are presented as figures of empowerment, their lack of evolution and a certain superiority over male characters contrast sharply with the more balanced and developed figures of earlier times. How are male characters portrayed in Hollywood movies in recent years? In movies like Captain Marvel, Birds of Prey, Star Wars, The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, The Rise of Skywalker, and Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, male characters are often portrayed in a derogatory way to create contrasts with the heroines. In many cases, they are depicted as weak, clumsy, or morally ambiguous, which highlights the strength and superiority of the female protagonists. Male characters are typically more focused on mistakes or weaknesses rather than abilities or leadership, particularly in comparison to the heroines. In Star Wars, Finn starts as a clumsy and fearful deserter, and for much of the trilogy, he is relegated to a secondary role behind Rey. Similarly, Poe Dameron, though a skilled pilot, is portrayed as impulsive and at times immature, with an arc that emphasizes his flaws rather than his leadership. Nick Fury in Captain Marvel is represented significantly differently from other films in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, MCU. Here he is a comedic, clumsy, and fearful character, in contrast to the brilliant and powerful strategist he is in other films. His relationship with Carol Danvers highlights that she is much stronger and more decisive, while Fury is more passive and less influential in the narrative. Once again, the male character is depicted as inferior to exalt the female character's superiority. The character who betrays Harley Quinn in Birds of Prey, Doc, the restaurant owner who turns her in, is presented as initially friendly and protective, but ends up betraying her for money. This character reflects the trend in many of these films of portraying male characters as selfish or immoral, emphasizing the independence of the female protagonists and their ability to deal with betrayal without relying on others. In Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, Indiana Jones, though still a beloved character, is outsmarted and outperformed by his female co-star, reinforcing the image of male inferiority compared to the female character. In summary, male characters in these films are often portrayed as less competent, weaker, or morally ambiguous, which serves to highlight the strength, capability, and independence of the heroines. Now then, the majority of the audience for action, adventure, and science fiction films is and has always been male. And no one likes to pay for a movie ticket just to be told they are worth less, that they are inferior. Therefore, in many cases, audiences have not responded favorably, leading to financial losses for some projects. But why have film companies allowed the spread of this extremist ideology in the first place? We will address this topic in a future video. Is this cultural shift a step forward or a step backward? Is it better to install a new form of supremacism instead of an idea of equality and cooperation between men and women? What do you think? Leave us your opinion in the comments. We hope you enjoyed this video. If you want us to cover a specific topic, please write it in the comments. Give this video a like and share it so your family and friends can also learn about the truth about new feminism in Hollywood. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe. And don't miss our recommended video at the end. You will enjoy it. Never forget. History is the imitator of time, the repository of actions, the witness of the past, the example and warning of the present, the caution for the future.